Hey everybody, guys, girls, ladies and gentlemen. I have news. I have good news. I've released a new version of Alphaverse. I think you're gonna like it. There's been some big changes, and rather than me attempting to fix the existing Alphaverse Live or Alphaverse Auto, it was easier for me to switch to a brand new version. It gives me great pleasure today to announce Alphaverse XRP. And as you can probably guess by the name, it's called Alphaverse XRP because I've switched from using TRX to now using XRP. And why am I using XRP over TRX? Two fundamental reasons. The first one is that XRP is so much faster than TRX. And secondly, the transaction fees are a lot less. And they were important because part of the transition away from Alphaverse Live into Alphaverse Auto, which I have to confess, I never used. I was still on Alphaverse Live for a long period of time. And the big difference between Alphaverse Live and Alphaverse Auto is obviously the casino have taken away the ability to tip funds between accounts. Now, I still had tipping capability on pretty much all of my accounts, but it got to the point where it became unusable because they started to put some restrictions on the amount that you could tip per 24-hour period. So it forced me to move down into Alphaverse Auto. So all you people out there that are using Alphaverse Auto, this is just for you. And I apologize if you've been struggling so hard with that. Simply because I was not using it, I haven't been sort of in tune with the sorts of issues that you guys are facing. But now I am fully committed, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Alphaverse XRP. And think of it as being more of a ground up build, even though it's going to look very similar. Under the hood it is very, very different. If you want to switch to Alphaverse XP, I would suggest that you probably grab a notepad and pen. I've tried to make that as easy as possible. And I'm going to do it live with you here on this video. I'm going to do a migration from Alphaverse Live and even Alphaverse Auto to Alphaverse XRP. But before we get into that, I just want to talk about the fundamental changes that have gone on in Alphaverse XRP over Alphaverse Auto. So the first one, which is really bloody obvious, which is the fact that we've moved away from TRX. And we've now moved to XRP, and I have it running here. I have done extensive testing. I've been working on this solidly for the last week. It's been a lot of work, but I'm pleased with the outcome. I think the key here is intimately understanding what you can do, and more importantly what you can't do, because I did waste a lot of time when I was developing this with the assumption there were certain things that I could do that I thought I could do, which I subsequently found out I couldn't do. So I did waste some time, but I did learn a lot. So what are the key things that I found out that you can't do, that I thought maybe we might be able to do? You know, what I wanted to do was to have Alphaverse Auto very similar to the original Alphaverse. You know, the client runs, it detects a bus. In Alphaverse, it used the tipping function to send funds from one account to the other, and it used the vault strategically. Now, my initial thinking was, on a bust, rather than tipping, it would deposit the recovery pot. Does that make sense? And on a recovery, it would put that back into the vault. And then I thought, like the original, the server knows where the recovery vault is. If it then received another crash, if one of the other bots bust, it would know which client has got the recovery pot and whether I could recreate the ability, instead of tipping the recovery pot, that it does a withdrawal from one account to the other account. You can see why I wasted a lot of time, because there were two things that fundamentally failed in that process, and it was flawed. And it was flawed because I've discovered, and I knew this already, but I thought I had overcome this. When you deposit an amount of money on the casino, you have to wager it 1x before you're able to withdraw it. Now that is a problem. That is a big problem, because if you deposit the entire recovery pot and you win on the next bet, you can't withdraw it. So I had to find a solution to that. So keep listening, because I have found a solution. Now secondly, I since discovered as well that it's not feasible to withdraw from one account on the casino to another account on the casino. To be honest with you, I don't know why. Maybe this is some sort of security. But if you try, there's a lot of things that don't work on the front end that do work via API, or they behave slightly differently. So I thought, yeah, I know I can't do this on the front end, but maybe API, I could code it. But to save you the time, effort and energy, I can tell you, whether you code it or use the front end, that does not work. So those two principles were fundamentally flawed. And so that forced me to revisit and think, what are the solutions to these problems? The 1x wager. The only solution I could see to that particular problem would be if we only deposit just what's needed for the next bet. Wouldn't that be logical and sensible? Because if it only deposits, even if it's just a tiny amount, well, the next bet will be that 1x wager, and that overcomes that issue. And if it crashes again, it would deposit the next bet, and such forth. Okay? So some of you will be following me here, trying to get the Janus code up and running. Now the Janus code is playing the perfect strategy with a combination of infinity code, running the game blackjack. Works really well. I had some issues with that particular version of the code. I hit some issues with early versions of the code where, stage 2 is the build phase. It could lose if it doubled down and then lost the game, and martingale didn't work. And I made modifications to that code, and I did run like that for a long period of time, and then I discovered there were other instances where the martingale still would fail, and it dawned on me the obvious thing was it's when it splits. Now the new version of the code basically doesn't double down and it doesn't split all the whilst it's on phase 2. In stage 2 it still kind of plays the perfect strategy, it just avoids doubling down and splits. And that's not true for stage 1. Stage 1 is you can't lose and it just wagers. My initial testing is very, very good. Very good. I mean, in 12 hours it wagered like 100 times the start balance. And because now we're using XRP, it is now depositing just the next bet amount. Does that make sense? I'm hoping this is making sense. Now the clever part within all of this was the mechanics of how I got that all working. So now I had a problem. I need to instigate the deposit from the server, because the server's like the orchestrator. It orchestrates everything. It doesn't do any betting, it's just the orchestration tool. The clients do all the work. It's got the client code that connects to the casino. You've got the Electron reverse proxy that accepts, API requests, and then you've got the Dicebot code itself. Now traditionally they've all kind of been independent, but now we needed to pass information between them. And we kind of always did that anyway to a certain extent. Certainly from the client side down into the server side. How do you think the server detected the bust? And there were certain bits of it. How does it work out, what the name of the client is that's running? How does it work out what IP address? All of that is passed through using a sort of HTML page with its status. And so the server could pick those up and act upon those. So I just needed to make a modification to the client to include the value of what the next bet is. And the client gets that information because there's a Dicebot state file when the Dicebot runs that constantly is updated. Yeah, and that runs in a RAM drive on the client itself. And it's the client can read that Dicebot status and it can pick up the value of next bet. it can then include that information in the status page, so the server can then act accordingly to know to instruct to the XRP wallet the exact amount to deposit and who to deposit to. Now the second challenge within this was obviously every single bot has its own account, and every account has its own unique depositing address. Now the way we got around that in the old version using TRX is that we had to manually go into every account to get that information, and we populated that information out into the client config file. What a ball ache of a job. I have subsequently worked out how to retrieve wallet details using API, so you don't need to do that. So now included in the status page includes that particular client's not only the next bet, but its wallet address and its destination tag, and that means it can then be passed on to the server. So when a bust is detected, the server then knows how to deposit the next bet amount to the right account, to the right wallet, and the right destination tag. That makes sense? I really hope this makes sense. Now the second component that I had to overcome, the mechanism of depositing. Now before we used Tron link, and we were directly, in effect, coding directly on the blockchain, and we were using Tron grid to do that. But I discovered there's a neat tool. You can download a node based application using Node Packet Manager called XRPL. And if you get a software wallet, and the one I'm going to recommend is this one here, it's Atomic. I believe they do two versions of this software. You can one as a plug-in to Chrome or Chromium or Firefox, whatever you want, and there's a standalone wallet. I put a link to their website so you can have a play of it. It works on Mac, Windows, whatever you want, Linux. It's a software wallet. Now I have to be very careful what I show you here, because one of the things that we need to obtain from this wallet is its secret key. And the way we get that is you go to settings, you go to private keys, you put your password in, and you scroll down to XRP, and then there it's going to show you public key, which is your wallet address, which is basically going to be the same as your wallet, and underneath there is going to be your private key. It's that you need to make note of, and it's that you never ever want to share that with anybody. That is yours, that is private. And so I've made some fundamental changes to the way that the software actually works now. In the past, we would have put that in a config file. Today, we don't do that. You make note of that. That is your private key and nobody else's. And I'm going to show you as we go further in this video how you inject that at the point of launch. When you launch the server, you need to input that every time you launch it. And this negates us being able from needing to store that information in basically, I would say, insecure config files. It doesn't matter if people see your wallet deposit address, because nobody can do anything with that. So that's been another big change. There's been another big change in the security aspect of Alphaverse. We will cover that in much more detail, because like I said on this video, I'm going to show you how to migrate. And I'm going to do the step-by-step instructions. It's really easy. I promise you, it's really easy. And I will provide you the list of commands that you need to run. All I'd say is just be a little bit cautious. Make sure, as always, engineering, measure twice, cut once. Maybe measure 3 times. So another change that's gone on to Alphaverse XRP is for some of you that are running Alphaverse Auto, I found there was a bug. There was a bug on the front end. And the front end sometimes would stop working. And if you've got that problem, I'm really sorry. I know what the problem is. And it's been resolved in this issue. And if you're interested, the problem wasn't actually so much the front end. The reality is it's always been quite sensitive, but it's never been so profound as it has been lately. When it gets all the data to populate all the rows and columns, that all comes from the client side. So sometimes if you have a connection issue, it would return not a value but a null value, and a null value would be returned back down to the server, and then the server tries to render that with a fixed decimal length, which caused it to crash. So a null value to fixed 8 decimal places is never going to work, and that was the problem. What I have done, I've now moved away from fixed decimal. I've fundamentally changed it so it's a lot more robust. So quick recap, big changes, move to XRP, only deposits the next bet. Status page now pulls down XRP wallet details. You don't need to populate the client config with that. You don't need to specify the wallet secret in any config files anywhere. And promise me, guys, give me a promise, you never will give that to anybody. Most of you are going to be sensible. You're basically going to download one wallet, and that's going to be the wallet that you use for every account, and that's going to be detached from anything else that you do. You know, I've only got a small amount on there, $200, but that be said, you know, it still will be secure because you don't need to put that information in any config file, and you definitely do not need to give that to anybody. If anybody asks you for that, stop, talk to me, tell them no. But if you've got this far in the video, I would suggest that you are very interested in what I'm doing, and there will be a few things in the pinned comment to this video. There will be a link to the Discord server, there will be a link to the GitHub repo, and in the description I'll put the detailed step-by-step instructions that I'm going to go through now on how we migrate either from Alphaverse Live or Alphaverse Auto into Alphaverse XRP. And please guys, if you've got this far, please remember to like the video if you like it. Comments are always welcome. If you can share this video, I'd be extremely grateful as well. And I suppose you've had enough of me waffling on. Okay. Before I do move on, I just want to state that there have been some additional enhancements on the security side of this software. I've noticed that there have been a few forks that have come from my original code. To be perfectly honest with you guys, I have got absolutely nothing to do with them whatsoever. I can't guarantee if your money's safe if you use any of those forks. I have no idea what that code's doing. So embedded within this new version, there's a whole bunch of checksums to make sure that you're running a legitimate version of Alphaverse. So rest assured, at the end of the video, I will tell you how you can verify whether you're running an original version, but it does check anywhere. And if anywhere down the line it identifies you're not running a legitimate version, it would just bomb out, okay? That's there to protect you at the end of the day. Crypto is a magnet for scammers and thieves. Right, I've got no more to say on that subject. I'm going to get on straight away now into doing a migration. Okay, I'm going to show you how easy it is to migrate to Alphaverse XRP. So the very first job you need to do is you need to stop whatever clients that you got running. Okay, so I've done that already. There are various ways to do that. That goes beyond the scope of this video. You can do it manually or you can do it via script. Now that is important because as we start to introduce new clients, they may attempt to automatically reconnect because we're not changing the server name, and that's going to be a problem. And it's going to be a problem because we're now using XRP, and because that's going to report a balance as 0 most likely, it's going to start instigating loads and loads of deposits. That's why it's so important that we stop anything running. And then you simply run a putty session into your server. And what I do, I keep a log of all the commands. I'll put them in the description of this video. You're going to see it's very, very easy to migrate. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just run the cd command just to make sure we're at the right directory, and we're going to kill all screens. So it's kill all screen. Okay, that one command kills any screen that's opened. Then we're going to simply pull down the repository for Alphaverse XRP. That was done really quick. Then we're going to go into that folder, and if you're doing a migration, You can use your old client config and your old server config. You don't need to create new ones. So on the newly pulled, we can remove the client config JSON file. Just be cautious here, guys. I said before, engineering, measure twice, maybe 3 times, cut once. Make sure you're in the right folder. Make sure before you run any command, that you got a backup. But just to be safe, I'm going to use the move command just to make sure, okay? And what this will do, this will rename the client config to client config.old, okay? And we're going to do the same for the server config. Just check that. Yep, server config old, client config old. And then we can copy from your old folder, whether it's Alphaverse Auto or Alphaverse Live, your old client config and your old server config into this folder. Okay, I've done that. I've done a client config and a server config. Just run an ls to make sure. So we've got a client config and we've got a server config. We've got the old one and the old one. We could have deleted them, but just to be safe, if you was accidentally in the wrong folder and you run that delete command, unless you got a backup, there's no recovery from that. So it's safer to move it. It's a bit messy, but it's safer. Right, believe it or not, we're very nearly there, okay? You may or may not be aware, when I created the Alphaverse original GitHub repository, instead of creating a repository for the server and a repository for the client, I created one repository. And they do have different requirements on the dependencies. So in order to get around that limitation, when you do a git pull, there is a package.json file for the server and there's a package.json file for the client. So on the server, we need to remove the package.json and we need to rename the server.package.json file to package.json. So don't worry too much. Like I said, I'm going to put these in the description. There's our package.json. So we then run a command called ncu with a -u, which is update. ncu is node check updater. It's a neat little tool that will go through your package.json file, look at the version numbers and the dependencies and see if there's any updates to them. And if it does, it will update your package.json file for you automatically. So it's a neat little tool. And you can see Puppeteer has been updated since the last time I've done this. And so that if we cat that now, you'll see that Puppeteer had been updated directly in the package.json file. So when we do an npm install, you're always going to be the latest edition. No matter what time you pull down Alphaverse, anything, as long as you run that ncu-u, you're always going to be running up-to-date packages. Does that make sense? So we're done. That was really quick. That is actually it. We're using the old server config, we're using the old client config, and we should be able to we've run an npm install and we should be able to just run. Oh, there's one other command that you need to run. I'll put these in the instructions as well. By default, when you pull down the repository, the bash scripts are non-executable. If anybody knows how to fix that, please let me know. On the GitHub repo, is there ways to mark them as executable? If anybody knows that, please let me know. But anyway, manually we just have to run chmod +x to enable execution. We basically want to change every .sh file under the bin folder to be able to be executable. And now we should be able to just start the server. Now if you come from the old Alphaverse days, you probably think, oh, that's it. We started the server. Not quite so on this new version. So if I go into the screen, there you are, you will see that the server is not running at the moment. And as you can see, the first thing it does is to make sure that you're running an unmodified version of this. This is the first layer of security and defense. As I said earlier, crypto is a magnet for scammers, guys, and it's my job to protect you, really. The folks out there of Alphaverse, I have absolutely no idea what they're doing. So there's now is a checksum that goes on to make sure, and that actually goes off to my website, and it does a checksum against the current file against the file that's securely hosted on my website. You know, it's unbreakable really. I wish some other vendors would do something very similar to this. Anyway, when you first start it, as I said earlier, we don't need to know what your central wallet secret is. That's, you never give that to anybody. When you launch it, it's going to store this in a constant variable all the whilst the code is running. So it's not stored in any config files or anywhere. So you need to enter those details. Obviously I won't show you mine, but when you enter the wallet secret, it then asks for what your wallet address is. And think of that as a form of validation, because that validation is checking to make sure you've entered the right wallet secret. Because if you've made one mistake in there, what can be done through the code is to work out what the wallet address is associated to that wallet secret. Does that make sense? And if they don't match through from the calculation that it does in the back end to your wallet address, it's just going to bomb out. It's going to say it's not valid, because there are risks here. If you put in the wrong wallet secret, you may lose funds, because it may attempt to, you know, send funds to a wallet that doesn't even exist, you know, or worst case, no, it does bloody exist, and you've got no way of accessing it. So it's really important that we get this right. Nowhere down the line are we telling it this is the central wallet that you deposit into. It's stored here. You control that. Never share your screen. Never tell anybody this. This is your private information. Right, if you're successful, you're going to see a screen like this. Okay, I've entered my wallet secret. I've entered my wallet address. They verified okay, and then it continued. Like I say, there's some checksums to make sure you don't make a mistake here. Right, believe it or not, that is it. That is the server done. We're running. All looks good and healthy. So the next job is I'm going to show you how we migrate a client. And there isn't a lot of difference, but the only real difference between the client and the server is I've also updated the proxy as well. Because the old proxy client is well out of date. It hasn't been updated for a long time. And so that came along with problems. And the biggest problem was the fact that it had a load of stake mirror sites that doesn't even exist anymore. And that brought around a relatively high level of instability. So there's a new version of the proxy client, and that is the only additional step that we need to do. So instead of waffling on, let me just show you. I'm just going to pick a random account. And the first thing you need to do, which is above and beyond what you need to do on a server, is obviously you need to make sure that the existing agent has been shut down. We need to go into the startup applications, and we need to remove it. And I suggest while you're here, because you're down, is you just run a quick update. Okay, that's done. So I've taken this one client here. I'll stop the Alphaverse agent from starting up by obviously removing it from the startup applications. That's now empty. And I've updated and I've rebooted. And that's basically where I am so far. So like the server, I'm just going to run a putty session into this. And we're going to go through a similar process. Run a cd command to make sure I'm at the root directory. I killed all screens, even though it's been rebooted, there'd be none anyway, but just belts and braces. And I run a git clone to pull down the latest version of XRP, the latest version of Alphaverse. We're going to cd into that. And just like we did on the server, I'm going to rename the client config file and the server config file and just put a .old extension on it. And just like we did on the server, I'm copying over my old client config and my old server config. So up until now, this has all basically been the same. Now the bit that we need to do differently is we need to go back to the root folder and we need to delete the old proxy. Thankfully, it's just as simple as deleting a folder. Just remove this rm-rf, and then the folder was called proxy. So our next job is we need to rebuild that proxy. So we go back into the Alphaverse XRP. I've written a bash script that actually will automatically rebuild the proxy agent for you, so we just need to run that. But before we do that, we need to make sure that the bash scripts are executable again, so we need to run a chmod command again. So the bash script to rebuild the agent is simply build agent.sh. So it's under the bin folder, so we run that and it will rebuild the agent for us. Now if you have any problems with this and if for some reason it breaks or it just takes ages, it's more than likely your VPN might need a restart. So now the agent is being rebuilt, we should be able to start it. And if we go on to back to the desktop, we should be able to, well, first off we want to add back to the startup applications the bash script that runs the agent. And it's important to run the bash script because what it does, it runs it in a RAM drive. It runs it more efficiently. So that's under the folder Alphaverse XRP bin and it's start Alphaverse agent. That means every time you reboot it's going to come up. But we can manually restart it and we're going to run that here by running the command start Alphaverse agent. And if we've done our job right, it should run fine. And you'll know whether you're running a new version because it's got all the updated mirror size. So that's the first start of it. As you can see, up to this point it's been relatively straightforward. Now one thing that we do need to change is obviously now we've moved to XRP from TRX. So we do need to make a modification to the client config file. And the easiest way to do that is just use WinSCP. Or you could use Nano if you was... Well, let's do that. Rather than using WinSCP, you get a Nano. Obviously this file contains sensitive information, guys. Never share this with anybody. The two bits that you're going to see is the unblurred out parts. We need to change a couple of things. The first one being the currency type from TRX to XRP. We need to change the bus threshold from -1 to 0.95, or whatever yours was set at. And the recovery threshold is 1.22 XRP, which is about the same as what it was when it was in TRX, around 10 TRX. I'm hoping this is all making sense. Control X, yes, to save it, and we just now need to install the dependencies. And like we did on the server, we're just going to run ncu-u. We don't need to make any changes to the package.json because by default it's right for the client. We only have to make that modification for the server. So ncu-u is going to check for the dependencies for me. At this time, when this video was created, it was relatively up to date. So there was no updates, but depending on what time in the future you're doing this, you may well update. And then we just simply run npm install. And that's going to install whatever's in the package.json file. Now I could run this right now, but I'm not going to, for the obvious reason. This particular account that I'm migrating across now, this is actually ready to go, but because there's no XRP in its balance, and as I was saying earlier, if I introduce a client that's got no XRP, it's going to repeatedly keep depositing small amounts. So we want to avoid that, and I'm just going to tip across I'm just going to tip across 2 XRP to it. That's done. I've sent across 2 XRP to the wallet and we are ready to go. So it's just run Alphaverse. .bin run Alphaverse. There we go. Successful. This is out of the box set up to run the Blackjack Janus code, and we're now on version 4.6. And believe me, there's been 46 revisions of that code. That was a bitch of a task to code for. And we should be able to run that. And we're betting. And it's playing the perfect strategy on Blackjack. I've run extensive tests on this, and as like I said, for me it ran really well. You know, I haven't tested this on anger with 160 bots yet. This version. I have on previous versions, and this is an improved version where it doesn't double down on stage 2 and it doesn't split on stage 2. Now as you can see, that was really easy to migrate. You know, as Alphaverse begins to evolve, you know, I try my damnedest to make it easier for people, and I'm working on this. You know, we don't end here. There are further refinements, you know, to to the whole architecture and the way that Alphaverse works, I'm going to be working on. And so I think the next iteration of this, Alphaverse, think of this page here as being like an admin page. And so I'm going to create a beautified front end, with just charts and graphs. If you've got any ideas of what you think would be useful, then please let me know, preferably in Discord. Part of the reason this took so long was the extensive testing that I went through to get to this stage. I'm pretty certain I've ironed out all oddities and nuances, and I've verified that the deposit, the withdrawal, the vaulting is all behaving as expected. Can I guarantee 100%, hand on heart, there's an edge case out there where there's something could go wrong? I can't. I haven't tested everything, but the extensive testing I've done fills me with enough confidence that I'm willing to release this to the public now. You don't have to run the Janus code. The disadvantage of running the Janus code is slow. And it's obviously going to be slower because you're playing multiple rounds per bet. It's significantly slower than, say, for example, playing dice where you can get 10, 12,000 bets per hour. This be lucky to get 4,000 bets per hour. But the amount of wagering more than makes up for that. And for those that are interested, when you pull down the latest version of Alphaverse, the XRP version, the Janus code is there. I will put this in Discord as well independently. And I appreciate at this point here that every part of this video has been targeted people, existing users of Alphaverse. For all new members who want to use Alphaverse, you can go to the GitHub repo. There is a README file and it's got detailed setup instructions here. And in there will be a link to this video here. But also there'll be a link, I'll add it in there as well, a link to the Discord server, because that's where you're going to get majority of their help. There's plenty of people that are willing to help you if you've set up Alphaverse from scratch yourself. So listen guys, I am literally ending the video here. I am going to hand this over to you. I welcome your feedback and I'll speak to you all again very, very soon.